After my husband's funeral, my sister claimed her son was his child and demanded half my $800K house with a will. I couldn't stop laughing because what she didn't know about my husband would destroy her. Subscribe to the channel and like the video to see more stories like this. When my sister Rebecca stood up at her son's first birthday party, just 3 days after burying my husband, and announced that little Tommy was actually David's child and she was entitled to half of our $800 house according to his will, I had to bite my lip to keep from bursting into laughter. If only she knew what I knew about my dear departed husband. Let me back up a bit. David and I had been married for 8 years. To everyone else, we looked like the perfect couple. Successful, attractive, living in our beautiful suburban home that we'd worked so hard to afford. David was a financial advisor, charming and well-liked by everyone who met him. I worked as a marketing manager for a local firm. We had what most people would consider an ideal life, but marriages aren't always what they seem from the outside, are they? About 2 years into our marriage, I started noticing things. Little things at first. David would get mysterious phone calls that he'd step outside to take. He'd come home late with elaborate explanations about client meetings that never quite added up. His phone was always face down, and he'd gotten suddenly protective of it in a way he'd never been before. The thing about David was that he thought he was much smarter than everyone else, especially me. He had this condescending way of explaining things, like I was too simple to understand complex matters. "Don't worry your pretty little head about it, Sarah," he'd say whenever I asked about our finances or his work. He handled all our investments, all our major financial decisions. I was just supposed to trust him. And I did trust him for a while. My sister Rebecca was always the dramatic one in our family. 3 years younger than me, she'd always been jealous of what I had. When I got married, she made snide comments about how some people get all the luck. When David and I bought our house, she couldn't hide her envy. "Must be nice to have a husband who actually makes money," she'd say, comparing him to her string of unemployed boyfriends. 2 years ago, Rebecca suddenly announced she was pregnant. She was cagey about who the father was, just saying it was someone special who couldn't be in the picture right now. The family assumed it was just another one of her poor choices in men. Rebecca had always been attracted to unavailable guys, married men, men with girlfriends, men who clearly weren't interested in anything serious. When Tommy was born, I have to admit, there was something familiar about him. He had these distinctive green eyes that reminded me of someone, but I couldn't quite place it. Rebecca was secretive about everything related to his birth certificate and paternity. She moved back in with our parents and played the struggling single mother perfectly. David, meanwhile, had started acting even stranger around that time. He seemed nervous whenever Rebecca and the baby were around during family gatherings. He'd make excuses to leave early or would suddenly remember urgent work calls. I thought it was just because he wasn't comfortable around babies. We'd been trying to have children ourselves without success, and I assumed it was painful for him. The trying for children part was another source of tension between us. After 3 years of trying, David suggested we both get tested. The results came back, showing that I was perfectly fertile. David's results, however, were interesting. The doctor explained that David had an extremely low sperm count, so low that natural conception would be nearly impossible. When I brought this up with David, he brushed it off, saying the doctors didn't know everything and we should keep trying naturally. But here's the thing. I'm not as naive as David thought I was. I might have let him handle the finances, but I was paying attention. I started noticing patterns in our bank statements. Regular withdrawals of cash, always in amounts just under the reporting threshold. Charges at restaurants and hotels in towns where he supposedly had no clients. Credit card bills with purchases I couldn't account for. So I did what any smart woman would do. I started keeping my own records. I opened a separate bank account that David didn't know about. I started taking pictures of documents when he left them lying around. I began saving money from my own paycheck. Money that David assumed I was spending on household expenses and my silly little shopping trips. The day David died was both the worst and most enlightening day of my life. He had a massive heart attack at the age of 38. No warning, no previous health issues. Just collapsed at his office and was gone before the paramedics arrived. I was devastated, of course. Whatever his faults, I had loved him. But I was also terrified about our financial situation. David had always told me that everything was taken care of, but I'd never seen actual documentation of our assets, our insurance policies, our investment accounts. Imagine my surprise when I met with David's lawyer, Mr. Patterson, and discovered that my husband had been far more successful than even I had known. The $800 $800 house was paid off completely. There were investment accounts worth over $1, $2 million, life insurance policies totaling $500,000. Apparently, David had been very, very good at his job. But then Mr. Patterson handed me something that made my blood run cold, a will dated just 6 months ago that I'd never seen before. According to this will, David acknowledged that he had a son named Thomas James Miller, my sister's son, and that this child was entitled to 50% of his estate. I sat in that lawyer's office, staring at the document that would essentially cut my inheritance in half. off and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just the shock of learning about David's affair with my own sister. It was the realization of how calculated this had all been. "Mrs. Mitchell," Mr. Patterson said gently, adjusting his glasses. "I know this must come as quite a shock. David came to me 6 months ago wanting to update his will. He seemed troubled. He said he needed to make things right regarding a child he'd fathered." I found my voice finally. "Did he provide any proof of paternity?" "He said he was planning to get a DNA test, but wanted the will in place first. He seemed to think time might be running out." Mr. Patterson paused. "Given his sudden passing, I assume the DNA test was never completed." That's when it clicked. David's increasingly erratic behavior over the past 6 months, the way he'd been working out obsessively, taking all sorts of supplements, complaining about chest pains that he dismissed as stress. Had he known something was wrong with his heart? Had he been preparing for this? I left that office with my mind racing. The funeral was the next day, and I had to pretend to grieve my loving husband while processing the fact that he'd been sleeping with my sister and had potentially given away half of everything we'd built together. The funeral was exactly what you'd expect for someone like David. The church was packed. His colleagues from the financial firm, our neighbors, family, friends, everyone came to pay their respects to the wonderful man taken too soon. Rebecca was there, of course, playing the supportive sister role perfectly. She sat in the front row with our parents, holding little Tommy, dabbing at her eyes with tissues. I watched her during the service, really watched her. The way she kept glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. How she held Tommy just a little closer whenever someone commented on how much the baby had grown. The small, almost smug smile that flickered across her face when people weren't paying attention. After the burial, people came back to our house. Rebecca cornered me in the kitchen while I was arranging flowers. "Sarah, I know this is a difficult time," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "but I think we need to talk soon about Tommy's future." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew exactly what she meant. "Well, David was special to me, and Tommy deserves to know about his father. There might be things that David would have wanted Tommy to have." The audacity was breathtaking. She was already planning her move, and David had been in the ground for less than 4 hours. "Rebecca," I said carefully, "I think you might be confused about something." Her eyes flashed with something that looked almost like panic before she recovered. "Confused about what?" "About David's relationship with Tommy. David couldn't have children, Rebecca. We found out years ago that he was essentially sterile. The lie came so easily. I wanted to see how she'd react." Rebecca's face went through a series of expressions: shock, calculation, then defiance. "That's not true," she said firmly. "David told me about the test results. He said the doctors were wrong, and there it was." She'd just admitted that David had told her about our private medical information. Information that he could only have shared with someone he was intimately involved with. "When did David tell you this?" I asked quietly. Rebecca realized her mistake immediately. Her face flushed red, and she started stammering. He mentioned it once when we were talking about family stuff. You know how David was. Always worried about you two not having kids." But I could see the fear in her eyes now. She was realizing that she'd revealed too much, too soon. That night, after everyone had left and the house was finally quiet, I sat in David's office and began going through his things properly. Hidden behind his diplomas, I found a key to a safety deposit box I didn't know existed. In his desk drawer, under a false bottom I discovered by accident, there were printed emails. Emails between David and Rebecca going back almost 3 years. The emails told the whole story. It had started as Rebecca complaining about her financial situation, asking David for advice, then asking for small loans. Then the conversations became more personal, more intimate. Rebecca had been playing the vulnerable, needy sister-in-law, and David had fallen for it completely. The emails from around the time of Tommy's conception were particularly enlightening. Rebecca had been strategic about everything, tracking her fertility, scheduling their meetings, even discussing how to keep the pregnancy secret. She'd played David like a violin, convincing him that she loved him, but that they had to be careful because of me. But the most recent emails were what really made my blood boil. Rebecca had been pressuring David to leave me. She wanted him to divorce me and marry her, giving Tommy a proper family. David had been resistant at first, but in his last few emails, he seemed to be wavering. He'd started talking about doing the right thing and making sure Tommy was provided for. The final email, sent just 2 weeks before David's death, was Rebecca reminding him about updating his will. She'd even suggested the specific language to include about Tommy being his son. I printed everything, every single email, every text message conversation I could find on his laptop, every piece of evidence that showed the depth of their deception. Then I sat back and started planning. Because Rebecca had made one crucial mistake in her scheming, she assumed I was the same naive, trusting woman who'd let David handle everything. She had no idea that I'd been preparing for something like this for years. Tomorrow was Tommy's first birthday party. Rebecca was planning to make her big announcement, to stake her claim on David's estate. She thought she held all the cards with that will, but I had something she didn't know about, proof that everything in David's will was based on a lie. The birthday party was being held at our parents' house, and Rebecca had gone all out. Balloons, decorations, a cake that probably cost more than she could afford. She'd invited everyone, family, friends, neighbors. It was clearly meant to be her big moment, her grand reveal. I arrived fashionably late, wearing the black dress I'd worn to David's funeral. Rebecca raised an eyebrow at my choice of attire, but I just smiled and handed her a beautifully wrapped gift for Tommy. "What's this?" she asked, shaking the box slightly. "Just something I thought Tommy should have," I said sweetly. "Something that belonged to his father." I watched Rebecca's face carefully. For just a moment, I saw excitement flash in her eyes before she caught herself. She was already thinking about David's things, about what she might be entitled to claim. The party went on as normal for the first hour. Tommy played with his toys, oblivious to the drama that was about to unfold. Our parents cooed over him, taking pictures, making the usual grandparent comments about how fast he was growing. Several family friends were there, people who had known David and me as a couple. I made small talk, accepted condolences about David's passing, and played the grieving widow perfectly, all while watching Rebecca get more and more nervous as the afternoon wore on. She kept checking her phone, fidgeting with her jewelry, glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. Finally, just as people were starting to think about leaving, Rebecca stood up and clinked her fork against her wine glass. "Everyone, if I could have your attention for just a moment," she announced, her voice slightly shaky but determined. "I have something important to share with all of you." The room fell quiet. Our mother looked confused. Our father lowered his beer, and everyone turned to look at Rebecca. She took a deep breath and launched into her prepared speech. "As you all know, we recently lost David, and it's been devastating for all of us, especially Sarah." She paused to look at me with what she probably thought was a sympathetic expression. "But today, on Tommy's first birthday, I think it's time for the truth to come out." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. David's will. David and I, we had a special relationship, a relationship that resulted in Tommy. She gestured to her son, who was happily chewing on a toy car. "David is Tommy's father." The room erupted. Gasps, shocked exclamations. Our mother actually dropping her coffee cup. I just sat there, perfectly calm, watching the chaos unfold. "That's impossible," our father said, standing up. "Rebecca, what are you talking about?" "It's true, Dad. David acknowledged Tommy as his son in his will. According to this legal document, Tommy is entitled to half of David's estate, including half of Sarah's house." Rebecca was gaining confidence now. Feeding off the shock in the room, she unfolded the will and held it up like a trophy. "Sarah, I know this is hard to hear, but David loved Tommy. He wanted to provide for his son. The house is worth $800,000, so Tommy's share would be $400,000. I think we should discuss how to handle this fairly." Everyone turned to look at me. I could see the mixture of shock, sympathy, and curiosity on their faces. They were waiting for me to break down, to cry, to react with the devastation that any wife would feel upon learning her husband had fathered a child with her own sister. Instead, I started laughing. It started as a small chuckle, but it grew until I was genuinely laughing out loud, the kind of laughter that makes your sides hurt and your eyes water. The entire room was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. "Sarah," our mother said tentatively. "Honey, are you okay?" I wiped my eyes and stood up, still smiling. "Oh, Rebecca, this is perfect. Absolutely perfect." Rebecca's confident expression was starting to falter. "What do you mean?" "I mean this little performance of yours. The dramatic timing, the legal document, the whole thing, it's really quite impressive." I walked over to where she was standing and looked down at the will in her hands. "May I?" Confused but still thinking she had the upper hand, Rebecca handed me the document. I read through it slowly, nodding as if I was seeing it for the first time. "Yes, this definitely looks like David's signature. And the date is correct, 6 months ago." I looked up at the room full of stunned faces. "You know, this explains so much about David's behavior before he died. The guilt he was carrying around, the way he kept talking about making things right." Rebecca was starting to look nervous now. This wasn't going the way she'd planned. "The thing is, Rebecca," I continued, still holding the will, "there's just one tiny problem with your claim." "What problem?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila folder I'd brought with me. "Well, you see, while you were busy seducing my husband and convincing him to write you into his will, I was doing something too. I was getting a DNA test." The room went dead silent. "A few months ago, when David started acting so strangely around Tommy, I got suspicious. So I collected some hair from David's brush, and the next time I was babysitting Tommy, I swabbed his cheek, just to be sure." Rebecca had gone completely white. You can't have." "Oh, but I did." I opened the folder and pulled out the official DNA test results. "Would you like me to read the results out loud, or would you prefer to do it yourself?" Rebecca was shaking now. She knew exactly what those results would say, but she'd been so confident in her manipulation of David that she'd never considered the possibility that I might have independently verified the paternity. "According to Genetics Testing Laboratory," I read clearly so everyone could hear, "the probability that David Michael Mitchell is the biological father of Thomas James Miller is 0%. David Mitchell is excluded as the biological father." The silence in the room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. "So you see, Rebecca, while David may have believed your lies enough to put Tommy in his will, will, biology doesn't lie. Tommy is not David's son, which means this will is based on fraudulent information. I looked around the room at all the shocked faces. Our parents, the family friends, everyone who had just witnessed Rebecca's dramatic announcement fall apart in the most spectacular way possible. But here's the really interesting part, I continued, enjoying every second of Rebecca's humiliation. I've had these DNA results for 2 months. I could have confronted David with them before he died, but I didn't. Do you know why? Rebecca was staring at me with a mixture of terror and confusion. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Everyone else in the room was hanging on my every word, waiting for the next revelation in this family drama that had just blown up in front of them. I didn't confront David because I wanted to see exactly how far this would go. I wanted to see how much you were planning to steal from me based on your lies. I folded the DNA results and put them back in my folder. And honestly, Rebecca, you exceeded even my expectations. Our mother finally found her voice. Sarah, I don't understand. If you knew Tommy wasn't David's son, why didn't you say something? Because, Mom, I wanted to gather all the evidence I needed to prove exactly what kind of person my sister really is. I pulled out another set of documents from my folder. You see, the DNA test was just the beginning of my investigation. I could see Rebecca trying to calculate an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. The whole family was staring at her, waiting for an explanation that she couldn't possibly give. After I got the DNA results, I started digging deeper into Rebecca's story, and I found some very interesting things. I opened up to a bank statement. For instance, Rebecca, would you like to explain to everyone why you received $5,000 in cash deposits over the past year from various ATMs around town? Rebecca's face went from white to green. That's not. How did you get that? Oh, that's nothing compared to what else I found. I pulled out printed screenshots. These are text messages between you and someone named Marcus Chen. Marcus is apparently Tommy's real father, a married man with 3 kids who you've been blackmailing for child support. The gasps around the room were audible. Our father actually took a step back from Rebecca like she had a disease. You've been telling Marcus that you'll expose his affair to his wife unless he keeps paying you. $300 a month deposited into different accounts to avoid creating a paper trail. I looked directly at Rebecca. Meanwhile, you've been living with Mom and Dad, crying about how hard it is to be a single mother with no support. That's not. You can't prove. Rebecca was stammering, her entire composure crumbling. Actually, I can prove it. Marcus was very cooperative when I contacted him. Apparently, he's been terrified of you for months. He was actually relieved when someone finally called his bluff. I pulled out another document. This is a sworn affidavit from Marcus Chen, acknowledging that he is Tommy's biological father and that you have been extorting money from him. Our mother was now crying, our father was pacing, and the other party guests were looking like they wished they'd left an hour ago. But wait, there's more, I said, channeling my inner infomercial host. Rebecca, tell everyone about the credit cards you opened in David's name. If Rebecca had looked sick before, she now looked like she was about to pass out. I never. 3 credit cards totaling about $15,000 in debt. You used David's social security number and forged his signature on the applications. The cards were sent to a P.O. box that you rented specifically for this purpose. I showed everyone the credit card statements. Interesting purchases here: baby furniture, designer clothes, a vacation to Miami last month while you told everyone you couldn't afford to buy Tommy new shoes. The room was so quiet you could hear Tommy babbling in his high chair, completely oblivious to the fact that his mother's life was imploding around him. You see, everyone, this wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated long-term plan to defraud my husband and steal from me. Rebecca saw David as a mark, a successful, naive man who she could manipulate into believing he was Tommy's father. I walked over to where Rebecca was standing and looked her directly in the eyes. You played the vulnerable sister-in-law perfectly. You got him to feel sorry for you, then guilty about your situation, then responsible for his son. You convinced him to put Tommy in his will, and you were probably working on getting him to divorce me next. That's not true, Rebecca whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. Really? Because I also found the apartment listings you bookmarked on your laptop. A nice 2-bedroom place for you, David and Tommy. You had it all planned out, didn't you? I turned back to address the room. The beautiful irony is that David's heart attack actually saved our family from years of this woman's lies and manipulation. If he had lived, she would have eventually convinced him to leave me for her and their son. She would have gotten half of everything in the divorce, plus child support for a child that wasn't even his. Rebecca suddenly found her voice again, desperation making her bold. You can't prove any of this. Those documents could be fake. You're just jealous because David loved me more than he ever loved you. The room collectively held its breath. Rebecca had just admitted to the affair in front of everyone. Actually, Rebecca, I can prove all of this, because unlike you, I'm not a criminal. I reached into my folder one more time and pulled out a business card. This is Detective Martinez from the Fraud Division of the Police Department. I filed a report yesterday about the identity theft and credit card fraud. He's very interested in talking to you. Rebecca's legs gave out and she sank into the nearest chair. The fight had gone out of her completely. But here's what's really going to happen, I continued. You're going to return every penny you stole. You're going to to pay back the credit card debt. You're going to leave Marcus alone and stop extorting him. And you're going to disappear from my life forever. And if I don't? She asked weakly. If you don't, I press charges for identity theft, credit card fraud, and extortion. You'll go to prison and Tommy will end up in foster care while you serve your sentence. I paused to let that sink in. Or you can take the deal I'm offering. What deal? I smiled. Not a nice smile, but the smile of someone who had planned for every contingency. I'll give you 24 hours to pack your things and leave town. I've already spoken to Marcus, and he's agreed to pay legitimate child support directly to wherever you end up, but only if you never contact his family again. I've also set up a small trust fund for Tommy, $50,000 that he'll get when he turns 18, assuming you never try to contact me or anyone in this family again. Rebecca stared at me in shock. You're giving me money? I'm giving Tommy money, because none of this is his fault, and despite everything, he's still my nephew. I closed my folder with a snap. But make no mistake, Rebecca, this is not forgiveness. This is me buying you out of our lives forever. If you ever come back, if you ever try to contact anyone in this family again, if you ever mention David's name in connection with Tommy, I will destroy you completely. The room was dead silent, except for the sound of Tommy playing with his toys. Finally, our father spoke up. Rebecca, he said quietly, I think you should start packing. The aftermath of that birthday party was something I'll never forget. Rebecca sat in that chair for a full 10 minutes after I finished speaking, just staring at the floor while Tommy continued playing, completely unaware that his world had just changed forever. Our parents were devastated, of course. Mom kept crying and asking where she went wrong as a mother. Dad was angry, angrier than I'd ever seen him. The other guests quietly made their excuses and left, probably eager to get home and call their friends about the family drama they'd just witnessed. Finally, Rebecca stood up and walked over to Tommy's high chair. She picked him up, and for a moment, I saw something in her face that might have been genuine remorse, but then she looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, Sarah, she said quietly. Yes, it is, I replied firmly. It's very much over. She left without another word, taking Tommy with her. Mom tried to follow her, but I caught her arm. Let her go, Mom. She made her choices. But Tommy, Mom started. Tommy will be fine. He's better off away from all this mess. The next morning, I got a phone call from Detective Martinez. Rebecca had come to the police station at 6 a.m. to confess to the credit card fraud and arrange a payment plan. She'd also provided Marcus Chen's contact information and agreed to stop all contact with him and his family. She seemed very motivated to cooperate, Detective Martinez told me. Whatever you said to her yesterday really got through. I just explained her options clearly, I said. 3 days later, our mother called to tell me that Rebecca had packed up her things and left town. She'd left a note saying she was moving to Oregon to stay with a college friend and start fresh. She didn't leave a forwarding address. She took Tommy? I asked. Yes, but Sarah, she's still our daughter, and Tommy is still our grandson. Mom, Tommy was never our grandson. You heard the DNA test results. I know, but no buts. Rebecca made her bed. Now she gets to lie in it. I felt a little bad for Mom and Dad. They'd lost a daughter and a grandchild in one day, even if that grandchild had never really been theirs to begin with. But I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for Rebecca. She'd planned to destroy my life and steal everything David and I had built together. The fact that her plan backfired so spectacularly was just poetic justice. Over the next few weeks, I started the process of settling David's estate. The will that mentioned Tommy was invalid due to the fraudulent paternity claim, so everything reverted to David's previous will, which left everything to me. Mr. Patterson was impressed by how thoroughly I'd documented everything. I have to say, Mrs. Mitchell, your preparation was extraordinary, he said during one of our meetings. Most people would have been completely blindsided by something like this. I learned a long time ago not to trust anyone completely, I replied. Even my husband. The credit card companies were surprisingly understanding about the fraud situation. With the police report and Rebecca's confession, they agreed to write off the debt rather than pursue collection. Marcus Chen sent me a thank you card, along with a check for $5,000 for any trouble my poor judgment may have caused. I donated the money to a women's shelter. About a month after Rebecca left, I ran into David's business partner Jim at the grocery store. He'd been at the funeral and had heard through the grapevine about what happened at Tommy's birthday party. Sarah, I have to ask, he said awkwardly, did David know about Tommy not being his son? No, I said honestly. He believed Rebecca completely. She was very convincing. Jim shook his head. You know, David came to me a few months before he died, asking about life insurance policies and estate planning. He seemed really stressed about providing for his family. I thought he meant you. He thought he did mean me and Tommy. The thing is, Jim continued, David was talking about changing beneficiaries on some of his accounts. He wanted to make sure Tommy would be taken care of if something happened to him. I told him he should talk to you about it first, but he said he wanted to surprise you. This was news to me. What kind of accounts? His retirement accounts, some investment portfolios. He was planning to split them 3 ways, you, him, and Tommy. Jim looked uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but since the kid turned out not to be his, how much money are we talking about? Another $400,000, maybe more. I stared at Jim in shock. Rebecca's scheme had been even more successful than I'd realized. If David had lived long enough to change those beneficiaries, She would have walked away with close to $700,000 based on her lies. Did he change them? I asked. No, he died before the paperwork went through. Everything still goes to you by default. That night, I sat in David's office, looking at the investment statements and retirement account documents. Rebecca had been so close to pulling off the perfect crime. If David's heart attack hadn't killed him when it did, she would have gotten away with it. I thought about calling Detective Martinez and telling him about this additional attempted fraud, but decided against it. Rebecca was gone, and I had everything I needed to move on with my life. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected visitor. Marcus Chen showed up at my door looking nervous and uncomfortable. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Marcus Chen. I think you know who I am. Tommy's actual father, I said. What do you want? I wanted to apologize in person for my part in all this, and to ask about Tommy. I invited him in and made coffee while he explained his side of the story. He'd met Rebecca at a bar 2 years ago, had a brief affair, and thought it was over. When she contacted him months later claiming to be pregnant, he'd panicked. My wife and I were going through a rough patch, he explained. I was stupid and selfish, and Rebecca seemed to understand me in a way my wife didn't. But when she told me about the pregnancy, I knew I had to end it. But you didn't deny that Tommy was yours? She was very convincing. She had ultrasound photos, she knew details about when we'd been together, and honestly, the timing worked out. I was terrified my wife would find out, so I agreed to help financially but stay out of the picture. And the blackmail? Marcus looked ashamed. That started about 6 months ago. Rebecca said she needed more money, that Tommy was getting expensive. When I said I couldn't afford more, she threatened to contact my wife with proof of our affair. What kind of proof? Text messages, photos we'd taken together, even a video. He trailed off, looking mortified. So you paid her. What choice did I have? My wife and I have worked things out. We have 3 kids together. I couldn't risk destroying my family over a mistake I made 2 years ago. I studied Marcus for a moment. He seemed genuinely remorseful, and I could see why Rebecca had been able to manipulate him so easily. He was the type of man who would do anything to avoid confrontation. What do you want from me, Marcus? I want to do right by Tommy. He's my son. Even if the circumstances of his conception were complicated. Rebecca left town without telling me where she was going. I haven't been able to contact her in 3 weeks. And you want me to help you find them? I want to be a father to Tommy. A real father, not just someone who sends money to keep his mother quiet. I've told my wife everything, and she's agreed to let me be part of Tommy's life, if Rebecca will allow it. I thought about this for a long moment. Rebecca had hurt me deeply, but Tommy was innocent in all of this. And Marcus seemed genuine in his desire to step up and be a responsible father. I might be able to help you, I said finally, but I need something from you first. Marcus looked at me expectantly, probably thinking I was going to ask for money or some kind of favor. But what I wanted was much simpler than that. I need you to promise me that you'll never let Rebecca use Tommy as a weapon again. Against you, against your wife, against anyone. What do you mean? I mean that Rebecca is a master manipulator. She used Tommy to blackmail you, she used him to seduce my husband, and she'll use him again if given the chance. If you're going to be in Tommy's life, you need to be strong enough to protect him from his own mother when necessary. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand, and I promise. Good, because I know where they are. Marcus's eyes widened. How? Rebecca thinks she's smarter than everyone else, but she's predictable. She told our parents she was going to Oregon to stay with a college friend. I called every Rebecca who graduated from her college in Oregon and found her in about 2 hours. She's staying in Portland with a woman named Jennifer Walsh. You found her in 2 hours? Like I said, she's predictable. She always takes the easy way out. I handed him a piece of paper with Rebecca's address and phone number. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. If you contact her, you're on your own. I want nothing more to do with any of this. I understand completely. And Sarah, thank you for everything. After Marcus left, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. The chapter of my life that included David's betrayal and Rebecca's schemes was finally closed. I could move forward without looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next revelation or the next manipulation. I sold the house 6 months later. It was too big for one person, and honestly, it held too many memories of David and his lies. I bought a smaller place across town, closer to my job, and used the profit to travel, something David had never wanted to do because he was always too busy with work. I went to Italy, to France, to Greece, places I'd dreamed of seeing but never thought I'd visit alone. And you know what? I loved being alone. I loved making decisions without having to consider someone else's opinion. I loved not having to worry about whether my husband was lying to me or my sister was plotting against me. About a year after everything happened, our mother called to tell me that Marcus had successfully gained shared custody of Tommy. Apparently, Rebecca had tried to disappear again when he first contacted her. But Marcus had hired a lawyer and fought for his parental rights. Tommy was now splitting his time between his parents, and by all accounts, Marcus was a devoted father. Rebecca seems different, Mom said during one of our monthly phone calls. Quieter, more, I don't know, humble, I guess. Good for her, I said, and meant it. Maybe being exposed and held accountable had actually taught Rebecca something about consequences. Do you ever think about forgiving her? Mom asked hopefully. Mom, I'm not angry at Rebecca anymore, but forgiveness doesn't mean I have to let her back into my life. Some bridges, once burned, stay burned. 2 years after David's death, I met someone new. His name is Robert, and he's nothing like David. He's honest to the point of being blunt sometimes. He includes includes me in every financial decision, and he's never once told me not to worry my pretty little head about anything. We take trips together, we make plans together, and most importantly, he's never given me a reason to doubt him. I told Robert the whole story about David and Rebecca early in our relationship. I figured if he was going to run, better to find out sooner rather than later, but he didn't run. Instead, he said something that stuck with me. "You know what I admire most about how you handled that situation?" he said. "You didn't just react emotionally. You gathered facts, you made a plan, and you executed it perfectly. You turned a situation where you were the victim into one where you had all the power. I just didn't want to be made a fool of," I said. "You were never a fool, Sarah. You were betrayed by people you trusted. There's a difference." Last month, I got a wedding invitation in the mail. Marcus Chen was getting remarried, not to Rebecca, but to someone new. A woman named Lisa who worked as a teacher and had apparently embraced Tommy as her own stepson. The invitation included a note from Marcus thanking me again for helping him find his son and giving him the chance to be a real father. There was also a photo of Tommy, now 3 years old. He looked happy and healthy, surrounded by what appeared to be a loving family. It made me smile to see that at least one good thing had come out of all the chaos Rebecca had caused. I didn't attend the wedding. I wasn't that invested in Marcus's happiness, but I did send a gift for Tommy, a children's book about honesty and telling the truth. Maybe a little on the nose, but I thought it was appropriate. 3 years later, I'm finally at peace with everything that happened. I don't miss David, which probably says something about our marriage that I didn't want to admit at the time. I don't miss Rebecca either, obviously. What I've gained is something much more valuable than what I lost. I've gained the knowledge that I'm stronger than I ever thought I was, and that I don't need anyone else to complete me. I kept the DNA test results, the printed emails, and all the other evidence I gathered. Not because I think I'll ever need them again, but because they remind me to trust my instincts. When something seems off, it usually is. When someone's story doesn't add up, there's usually a reason. And when people show you who they really are, believe them the first time. Looking back, I realized that Rebecca actually did me a favor. If she hadn't been so greedy, so obvious in her manipulation, I might have spent the rest of my life married to a man who saw me as a naive little wife to be protected from the complicated realities of adult life. I might never have discovered my own strength, my own capability to handle whatever life throws at me. Today, I have a career I love, a man who respects me as an equal partner, and a life that's entirely my own. Rebecca, last I heard, she was working as a waitress in Portland and still struggling to make ends meet. Tommy visits his father every other weekend and is apparently thriving in school. Sometimes karma doesn't need your help. It just needs time to work. What do you think about this story? Have you ever had to deal with family betrayal like this? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for listening to my story, and thank you all for watching until the end.